Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, Your Excellency, good morning, and welcome to all of you for this very first MARPE talk on public diplomacy within the Erasmus Plus project on public diplomacy, corporate diplomacy, and civic diplomacy. I will introduce you the project in a very short time, but first of all, I would like to pass the floor to our rector, Thomas Legrand. Thomas, please.
Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. I'm delighted to welcome you to the first event of the MARPE Diplo project, endorsed by Erasmus Plus and aimed at developing European higher education curriculum in public, corporate and civic diplomacy by 2021. MARPE Diplo Talk in Ghent is particularly addressing public diplomacy, and we are very honored by the presence today of His Excellency Mr. Pavel Krušky, Ambassador of the Czech Republic, and the Honorary Mr. Bruno Joost de Ter Peerst, Honorary Consul of Portugal. Very welcome. And of course, we are very happy to welcome more than 40 participants today at this MARPE Diplo Talk in Ghent. Our university college is a famous member of the higher education community in Ghent. As such, we are a founding member of the Ghent University Association, an association with 4 of the most important institutions in our region. Artevelde University College was founded in the year 2000 from the merger of 4 local university colleges that had existed for decades before and that were each renowned for their specific domains of expertise. Today, our institution is a center of expertise for education, research and development, where students, staff members and strategic partners work together in a stimulating, internationally oriented environment. We are educating students who push the boundaries through creativity, innovative thinking and entrepreneurship, and we pursue excellence and sustainability. Our approach is based on a culture of internationalization. We are an active partner in several international networks and collaborate intensively with international partners for education and research purposes. This year we will reach a number of 15,000 students with a staff of about 1,450 people working on 11 campuses in this beautiful historic city of Ghent, and we're really part of this historic city center. We've decided not to leave the city, but to stay within the city. Our international policy is very ambitious and is a very specific part of our mission and our strategy. With this international policy, we wish to enhance professional identity of staff and students. We wish to further improve the quality of our education, and we wish to reinforce the quality of our research. We also wish to facilitate our social mission. We wish to shape our appreciative organization culture. We have a broad range of international educational programs, going from common exchange programs. We are very proud to say that more than 30% of our graduating students had an international experience during their study time. So we have the more common exchange programs, but we also have full 3-year programs taught in English, with important participation of students coming from all over the world. Our international service and our schools enjoyed welcoming more than 500 international students every year. Ladies and gentlemen, MARPE was founded in 1988, aiming at the development of a coherent, comprehensive and pan-European public relation academic platform, organizing a master program in European public relations. And during the 90s, it produced its first French and English cohorts, which had the opportunity to develop their academic activity in cities as Ghent, Paris, Eindhoven, etc. Later on, new educational approach emerged, with students from Ghent spending a semester in Leeds and students from Vienna spending a semester in Berlin. In 2002, the Dublin Leeds and the Lisbon Valencia exchanges were also included in the MARPE educational program. In 2008, we saw the involvement of new partners, and therefore MARPE was then structured in 3 language lines, each comprising universities that could send and receive students that would study in a particular language, like English, French, and there also started an Iberian line between Valencia and Lisbon. In 2015, MARPE became the MARPE Network, a pan-European network of academics and professionals aiming to expand students' understanding of public relations and its practice in the European Union and the global context. And in view of recent European and global social and political developments, the MARPE network aims to explore and contribute to the advancement of new areas of study connected to public relations and communication such as lobbying, public and corporate diplomacy. Today, the MARPE partner network consists of the Université de Lorraine, Universidad de Lisboa, Universidad Cardenal Herrera Valencia, University of Bucharest, and Artevelde University College of Ghent. From our point of view, there's one constant factor all along this MARPE journey that started in 1988, and that constant factor is Anne-Marie Auton. From the start of MARPE, she has been the driving force of the organization, and I wish to explicitly thank her for her commitment to the domain of public relations and public affairs in the international setting. Anne-Marie, thank you for being our host today, but thank you all the more for 25 years of MARPE leadership. Thank you. And of course, I would also like to thank the organizing committee with members of the mentioned institutions. So, before ending my talk, I would like to thank our speakers of today, Mr. Alastair McCapra, Mr. Pierluigi Puglia, and Dr. Nicolas Baygert. Sorry for that. And Mr. Richard Linning, who will be today's host and moderator. Nicolas White apologizes for not being able to participate as he was called on an urgent professional mission. I wished I could follow your thoughts today and the debate. Unfortunately, I have conflictual duties in my agenda, but I'm confident that the colleagues of the MARPE network will share a reflective document as a result of the first MARPE Diplo Talk. Please be very welcome and comfortable at our campus, and I wish you a very interesting conference. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Well, now we'll have a small introduction on today's first talk. So again, I also like to welcome you, and I welcome you on behalf of my colleagues. My colleagues from l'Université de Lorraine, Hélène Boulanger, the colleagues from the Universidad de Lisboa, Susana Carvalho, and Sonia Sebastao, the colleagues from Universidad Carvalho, Pedro Juan Pablo de Valencia, Pepe Martinez, and Sandra Pimena, and last but not least, of course, the colleague Anka Anton from the University of Bucharest. So we welcome you, and we also want to warmly thank our speakers, Alastair McCapra, the CEO from the CIPR, as well as Nicolas Baygert from the IHECS and ULB, and Pierluigi, who is the person responsible, head of communication of the UK British Embassy in Rome. I would also like to add a special mention to a 20+ years long friendship bringing Richard Linning back in Ghent. And it's a little bit back to the roots, as Richard has been an invited speaker for the MARPE English line on lobbying in public affairs, but that was back in the 90s, wasn't it? So let us have a few information about MARPE Diplo as a first, because this MARPE Diplo Talk is the very first activity of our 3-year Erasmus Plus funded project, aiming to develop a European higher education curriculum on public, but also on corporate and civic diplomacy. I already presented the 5 strategic partners, and I have also to add that this project wouldn't have been possible without the endorsement and support of our associated partners. So again, here, I would like to thank these partners for supporting us from the beginning of this journey. We have on the first part think tanks and larger associations, as the European Public Relations Education and Research Association, UPRERA, but also the United States think tank emanating from the New York University Gulf Lab, the Belgian think tank on political communication, Protagoras, whose president, Nicolas Baygert, will keep the floor in a minute. 5 professional public relations associations also endorse our MARPE Diplo project, the Charter Institute of Public Relations, represented today by its CEO, Alastair McCapra, Corporate Excellence in Spain, but also EPCA in Portugal, RRP in Romania, and the Belgian PR Association C-Square. Finally, also some individual researchers joined us, Roger Hayes, who will send us some questions in order to start our debate later on, and who wasn't able to join us as he's teaching actually right now at the University of Singapore, but also Bruno Asbuya from the University of Fribourg in Switzerland, and last but not least, although he will close the panel today, Pierluigi, Puglia, head of communication at the British Embassy of Rome, whom I met when he was a DEA student at the Université Catholique de Louvain. Ghent is the very first one, but of course we will continue our MARPE Diplo talks, and it will be followed in the 5 other cities hosting our strategic partners, and we will close this project on the research part of this Erasmus Plus project with a conference in April 2021 in Lisboa, so you're already all welcome to join us in this marvelous city. Besides research activities, as we aim to co-construct a curriculum with all these partners, strategic and associated, this also implies to have some education activities. We will therefore organize twice an intensive study program, also here in Ghent, collecting and reflecting on the different aspects and perspectives of public, corporate, and civic diplomacy. Well, this was it for the growth content. Narrowing down now. 1 week ago, Guy Verhofstadt stated that the endless debates, the long list of successive leave and remain amendments selected by the speaker, and then won or lost by tiny numbers of votes in the House of Commons, were not really a way to solve a problem of such magnitude. He was wondering for which reasons Mrs. May is willing to go to the European Parliament, and with which mandate as the UK Parliament votes are against the deal, against no deal, against the backstop, but no single proposal is in favor of a relationship between the EU and the UK. According to Verhofstadt, I quote, "Changing opinion every day created an uncertainty, an instability instead of concluding a real new relationship between the EU and the UK." To him, the present situation is an existential problem for the whole of Britain. The lack of clarity and the lack of stability is undermining any future discussion. What should matter is country before party. But which cross-party future relationship between the EU and the UK is the one the UK is willing to defend without using or abusing Brexit in order not to pay the high price of the lack of clarity? What Verhofstadt, who is representing the European Parliament in the Brexit talks, points at is also what Nicolas defined as the spine bone of public diplomacy, the long-term construction of coalitions and partnerships around issues. Going back into times, to the early 90s, Alan Gottlieb, the former Canadian ambassador to the United States, summed up his experience by saying, "The new diplomacy, as I call it, is to a large extent public diplomacy and requires different skills, techniques, and attitudes than those found in traditional diplomacy. This means to develop the information edge. In traditional diplomacy, as public diplomacy is the effort by the government of one nation to influence public or elite opinion of another nation for the purpose of turning the policy of the target nation in advantage." In the words of Hans Turk in his book, Communicating with the World, US Public Diplomacy Overseas, it is a government's process of communicating with foreign publics in an attempt to bring about understanding for its nation's ideas and ideals, its institutions and culture, as well as its national goals and current policies. National goals and interests are communicated to foreign publics in a variety of ways, including international broadcasting, cultivation of foreign journalists and academics, cultural activities, education exchanges, and scholarships, with Erasmus, of course, as best practice, programs, visits, and conferences, and publications. And this is where, of course, academics also play a role. But it is not a one-way street, however. In his book, Political Advocacy and Cultural Communications, Organizing the Nation's Public Diplomacy, Guilford Malone expounds a definition to include an understanding of others. If we strive to be successful in our efforts to create understanding for our society and for our policies, we must first understand the motives, culture, history, and psychology of the people with whom we wish to communicate, and certainly their language. Whatever the definition, paraphrasing Christopher Ross, the essential point is that public diplomacy, both in its short-term activities, for example, media relations, and long-term priorities, as cultural programs are, is undertaken by official bodies of one state to persuade the publics of another state to regard the national policies, ideals, and ideas of the targeting state favorably. I'm definitely curious to hear the development of our panel as regards the purpose to bring about greater understanding of and a more favorable disposition towards the host country's specific policies or initiatives when it comes to the Brexit. Even Potter wrote, "As with any good public relations strategy, goodwill is built over time in targeted governments and publics alike, so that there may be less friction on those occasions when interests diverge." So, which has been the capital of goodwill built by the UK as well as by the EU regarding each other's public opinions, as far as we can talk about a European public opinion, but that's another debate. I would like to pass the floor to my good friend Richard Linning, who kindly accepted to moderate this panel. Thank you.
think you can hear me without the benefit of the microphone. As moderator, my role really is not to interfere. It is to encourage the self-discipline of our speakers, but also to encourage your discipline. So, what we have agreed is that the speakers will talk for roughly 25 minutes. If you have an urgent question, we'll take it then. If not, we'll take all the questions in a Q&A at the end of it. I know the subject is Brexit. As you can see, I'm not in the first flush of youth. I've been involved in what is now called public diplomacy for 30 or 40 years. And I'd just like to relate one small experience. I worked for the Hong Kong government in London. And one of our best investments was each month in a bottle of sherry. Because we allowed the journalists who were members of the diplomatic corps in London to use our offices for their monthly meeting. So one bottle of sherry, a meeting room for an hour and a half, and the rewards were substantial. So enough from me. We have decided, Nicolas, I think you're first.
All right. Okay, thank you first of all for having me, and yes, it's my pleasure to start this round of talks, discussions. So I think, small presentation. Maybe I'm not a big fan of PowerPoint, but I'm using pictures normally to keep my students awake, to shock them sometimes. Like, oh, it's not television and we're just watching, it's actually a real person speaking. Thank you. So as Anne-Marie already, she presented the panel and she said that indeed we are, I'm chairing a think tank, an academic think tank in Brussels that is working closely with PR professionals and public affairs professionals in the Brussels bubble, the Eurocrats. We work also in the field of communication, so with research and publications, but we have a website, so if you're interested, you can have a look at that website. Now, I have to do the, yes, okay. So to be totally transparent, public diplomacy is not exactly my field of research. No, I have 20, 30 years experience in that field. My focus is more on EU public communication in the context of, for instance, Euroscepticism, populism. I also work on nation branding, on, of course, political communication. Yet I will try to offer my answer to today's question. And today's question is, I don't know if you see it somewhere, but are states ignoring the power of soft power, which is a difficult one, actually, to answer. And I will not necessarily provide an institutional wrap-up of the Brexit negotiation. I think nobody can really do that. It's, I think, very difficult, and my co-panelists have a true hands-on expertise on that matter, more than myself. So I will stick to the MARPE Diplo approach, that is not to debate the political, economic, or legal implications of Brexit, but to grasp its communicative dynamics. That's a little bit what I will try to do in the next 20 to 25 minutes. Now, of course, someone has to break the ice. Unfortunately, it's me, and in a provocative manner, I will, of course, let plenty of time to my co-panelists to develop their view and counter-argue. But my assumption, and perhaps likewise my answer to today's question, is that actually there is no public diplomacy stricto sensu in a conventional sense of the term, in the present intergovernmental or institutional framework in which Brexit is taking place. I'll try to explain that. And so what conventional definition of public diplomacy do I actually mean by this? Well, as you know, in its mainstream understanding, public diplomacy seeks to create a favorable image of the country and aims normally at winning the hearts and minds of global audiences. And so states seek to project a strategic narrative most of the time, and you can, for instance, look at public diplomacy as an instrumental practice, which sometimes can also be linked to something called nation branding. So there are a wide range of objectives across diverse fields, ranging from generating sympathy and understanding for a nation's ideals, goals, policies, model of society. So basically to build a positive image and to build relationships that in due time will facilitate ties and alliances and encourage sometimes investment, tourism. So lots of different objectives and goals that you can achieve with diplomacy. Now, there also is an interactive dimension of public diplomacy, which beyond diplomats involves a multitude of actors or networks, and it's particularly the case when you look at digital public diplomacy. That is more and more the thing and more important nowadays. And it's also sometimes seen as a key mechanism through which nations foster trust and mutual trust and relationships. And of course, this has become very important and crucial to secure a global environment. And by the way, the notion of mutually beneficial relationship also illustrates how the language of public relations shapes and taps into the theory of public diplomacy. So it's interesting to see how, from a theoretical point of view, these fields are actually merging more and more. So it can be defined, if public diplomacy can be defined as a conversational, dialogical form of international political communication. And this is where I want to take you right now, because we see that in creating these mutually beneficial relations, the idea, of course, is to gather support. And as such, it is a tool of soft power. This is one of the questions that were raised today. Now, according to some other definitions, public diplomacy also covers overseas information programs, cultural exchanges, propaganda activities, and even political warfare. So you see, it's a broad field. Now, if public diplomacy is about selling a story to foreign publics, in the case of Brexit, it is also about selling a story to your own people. And this is where it makes the thing a little bit harder. Huh? Oh, by the way, yes. So, selling a story to your own people. And it is important to sell the story of why we do what we do to our own people, and thereby, of course, seek their support. And thus, in case of Brexit, public diplomacy must be seen both as an effort of international political communication, but also an effort of internal political communication, so targeting the national audience. So in other words, public diplomacy apprehended as a model of external political communication with a domestic dimension. So it changes a little bit the definition. And now it appears that another reason why states engage in public diplomacy is sometimes to rectify a negative external perception or to reduce prejudices. So if you look at what happened right now with Brexit, For instance, the Swedish foreign minister stating that she cannot forgive UK for Brexit. You see that there's a lot of work. And public diplomacy is, to be frank, not only an altruistic affair. It's not only about creating nice relationships. It's also facing new challenges in times of crisis due to the concurrence, the competition of opposing images and messages. And in the current phase that we are in, basically in the early 21st century, the competition between states for favorable perceptions in global public opinion is getting increasingly important. It is actually the pivotal feature of the new, let's call it the new Trumpian international order. So the success in this competition is, and increasingly depends on basically whose story wins. It's all about stories, and once again, public diplomacy involves what you call in communication also storytelling, telling stories. And I will come back a little bit later at the importance of the Brexit narrative. So what we must actually ask ourselves is, what would be the nature and the content of the UK-EU public diplomacy enterprise? What is the tone by which the UK negotiators go forward and by which British leaders currently communicate? And the last question maybe, is the current context of the Article 50 negotiation really a moment for public diplomacy? So if we look at the context, and what actually strikes me is that it actually looks like an endless continuation of the framing that was set by the 2016 Brexit referendum. And what did we learn after that referendum? Well, first, if you remember that change was more mobilizing than the status quo. Maybe one reason why the Leave side was more successful. And this should actually come without a surprise. The Brexit adventure being considered as more exciting than what is called Project Fear. You probably heard the concept that was used by the Remain side. So basically, emancipation and freedom being more effective than a form of treaty-based political discipline or a form of intergovernmental little steps. So what is more attractive? And there is also considerable consensus that the EU referendum campaign was, as you know, a highly negative one. From accusations of Project Fear being run by the Remain camp, to controversies of UKIP's Breaking Point anti-immigration poster. You probably remember this. I'll show you that later, sorry. And so basically, it often felt like a positive vision for Britain's future in or out of the EU was actually lacking. So to win the framing context, the battle about interpretation, you of course need the media. And the UK media is, as you might know, among the least trusted in Europe, if you look at some surveys. And so basically forget about the Russian meddling or US companies pushing fake news on the web to influence the Brexit vote. Fake news to influence the UK public to vote for Brexit has mostly come from professional journalists in the UK, or so-called professional journalists. So there was a pivotal role of media, and this is, by the way, a list of fake news that were fabricated by the UK press over the last 20 years. Every single story has been debunked as fake news. The ones about curved bananas by Brussels bureaucrats in the Sun, Daily Mail, Daily Express. What else? Straight cucumbers.
or condom dimensions to be harmonized. Many other, like, EU targeting traditional Sunday roasts, or Eurocrats saying that Santa must be a woman. Lots of examples, but of course, the debunking effort that was made here by the European Commission actually did not really matter. What matters is the enduring campaign, the enrooted Euroscepticism over 20 years. And why is the Leave narrative such a strong one? Well, because, like I said before, it's taking you on an adventure, a tale of recovered grandeur, and of recovered sovereignty. Make Britain great again, So Brexit campaigners argue that the UK's economy would be liberated from the burden of regulation and restriction. New diplomatic ties could be, foreseen, and on this basis, an end to EU membership would create a phoenix future for the UK. So basically, how was that debate perceived in the other 27 countries? Well, first of all, we must all admit that the international press and the EU press committed what you could call a form of incorrect framing. What I mean with that is the famous line that was used in the Clinton campaign in the 90s, "It's the economy, stupid," you probably remember this, is wrong in the case of Brexit. And why did the economy fail to win the argument for instance, for Remain? Well, because the perceived costs of leaving the EU were not large in contrast to the perceived benefits of, for instance, reducing immigration. So, like Nicolas, who works on a lot on Brexit and on populism, stated, while people might be frustrated and worried about their socio-economic situation, it is the link to social-cultural threats that mobilize them to support Brexit. So Brexiters were actually very unlucky because one of the Leave arguments was that you need to open up Britain for an even more globalized free market, for more freedom to make some relationships with global players. Yet the Brexit electorate voted first for cultural and second for economic security. Now, what about the EU's public diplomacy effort during the Brexit referendum campaign? What has the EU done? Well, actually almost nothing. There was no real soft power strategy. There was no effort whatsoever in terms of digital public diplomacy. And I don't want to break some Chatham House rules here. I discussed this with fellow members from the European Commission, but according to EU officials, the watchword was about not intervening in the British domestic debate. Yes, the EU wanted to counter disinformation activities very well, but there was no real counter-narrative, no effective retaliation. And we know now that the goal of public diplomacy and strategic communication is no longer to engage with foreign populations and to foster relationship with them, but the goal is to influence, in current times, digital publics and shape their understanding of events. So once again, it is all about framing the debate. It's the battle for framing the debate, and you can use several instruments of public diplomacy. Numerous EU information campaigns, probably have seen them. They can be used as public diplomacy instrument, but it just doesn't work. And why was the EU and especially the Commission afraid to intervene in that debate? Well, because then you would see the risk and the fear was there that EU public diplomacy would be seen as a form of biased soft power, or worse, as propaganda that would further undermine the Remain side. And so of course, that strategy was not chosen. So what has changed since since the aftermath of the referendum as regards public diplomacy? Now, of course, the Leave side had to cope with attacks and accusation, fake news, offensive UKIP posters like this one, and manipulation, the IHECS lie, etc. And the UKIP party actually faced a terrible setback in the last elections, 2017. Now, what about public diplomacy on the EU side? Well, actually, the EU seems to have learned its lesson. There is a total contrast with the referendum campaign. The EU has adopted a bold discourse nowadays. It's actually quite an understatement. And I quote Michel Barnier, that you see here, already in 2016, the EU's chief Brexit negotiator said, "I'll have done my job if, in the end, the deal is so tough on the British that they prefer to stay in the EU." And Barnier appears to have spoken these words to other EU leaders back in 2016. And in the same article, it was quoted in Le Point, which is a French current affairs weekly. In the same articles, you can read that most other EU leaders actually shared this view, as well as Jean-Claude Juncker, President of the European Commission, who said that the Brexit must be a form of punishment for deserters. So besides the EU, the UK players or negotiators were gradually framed as unreliable and sometimes even as rogue players. And British negotiators never faced really up to the fact that Brussels, far from public diplomacy considerations, did not really care about a mutually beneficial deal. Theresa May kept saying that she wanted the EU to succeed. Her EU counterparts kept responding that basically they didn't care. I don't know if you can see that video actually. I don't know what I have to do to press play. No. Yeah. Oh, there's no sound. Otherwise, it's not. So this is the Bilateral from Luxembourg. Well, we can maybe watch it later. Basically, EU leaders nowadays are once again very tough on the UK. And why are they seen as stubborn, and why are they sort of punishing in their attitude? Well, because, as you might know, the EU is not designed as a democratic body in which power is devolved. There are rules. It exists mostly as a system of regulation and directives that are unbelievably difficult to change or break. There is no way to negotiate with that type of organization, which normally cannot compromise if just one of the 28 members won't go along. So if you're looking for EU soft power for charming negotiation with Cherry, well, this is actually what you get. The Commission is the new Iron Lady, basically. And the British press is actually now portraying the EU as being cruel and resentful negotiators, wanting to punish the EU. And actually this form of intimidating public diplomacy works, because as you might have read, regret, so the regret of Brexit is growing. And sometimes this image of a punishing European Union is backed by prominent voices, for instance, Viktor Orban, and other former EU leaders, former Prime Minister of Finland, Alexander Stubb, actually corroborates the punitive line of the European Union. So therefore, if you ask me, a hostile form of political communication has actually supplanted public diplomacy. Once again, we are in the Trumpian era. Deal-making public outrage diplomacy is now actually the rule of the game. And so now is not the time for soft power, but for the power of narratives and of deceptive framing. As you know, framing is there to select some aspects of a perceived reality and make that reality more salient in your rhetoric to promote a particular definition of a problem, of an issue, of a negotiation, for instance. So maybe some additional elements. Today, public diplomacy is also about debunking hostile framing and counter narratives. We are again in the post-truth era, the post-truth Trumpian public diplomacy era. It's all about alternative facts, alternative views, alternative worldviews, and the current framing that is ascribed to Brexit negotiation is a rather emotional one. It has a lot of emotional undertones. Remainers, for instance, are sometimes portrayed as uninspired moaners. You know, they are moaning basically, sticking to Project Fear, and then on the Leave side, you see today that there also is some wishful thinking going on, and with an emotional framing. If you look at Theresa May's speeches, Britain isn't afraid to leave with no deal. So in French, there is a word for the concept is called the antiphrase. It's a form of euphemism. It's basically saying the contrary that you think. The context is also an emotional one. There's a form of Brexit hysteria in the media. You can read that Brits are stockpiling items, bottles of wine. Some media suggests a civil disorder following a no-deal Brexit. There's even a story about the Queen being exfiltrated. So you see that the context is quite difficult. So it appears almost impossible to deploy a sound public diplomacy strategy in a period of political instability. You cannot both act as a public diplomat and as a crisis manager, as a political crisis manager. I do have my doubts. And this is actually Theresa May's paradoxical mission, both carrying its public diplomacy efforts while providing and proving herself as a strong leader. So as a consequence, the EU side of the Brexit negotiation does a lot more public diplomacy today than the UK side, because they have some internal issues to tackle first. Yeah, that's not something much. All right, so maybe I should leave it there. I don't know if in my 20-25 minutes I have lots of other things to discuss, but I don't want to speak too much.
If you does anyone have an urgent question? If not, then we will take questions later. What I'd like to, as moderator, while Alastair moves up to speak, I would like to say that the two definitions I'd like to put before you. One is that of public diplomacy, which was the outcome of a meeting which took place in the United States after 9/11, where a lot of American public relations people were brought together to discuss why is it that after 9/11 you have people on the streets in Egypt who are wearing all the evidence of admiring America, T-shirts and all the rest of it, and they're buying American products, but they are opposed to us. And the second definition I'd like to throw up for you is a definition of soft power. Because the definition of soft power is quite a simple one. Namely, it's to attract and co-opt rather than coerce. Attract and co-opt rather than coerce. And then we can talk about all the channels by which that can be achieved.
Thank you very much, Richard. So I should start off by saying that I agree with Nicolas, but despite agreeing with him, I do have other things to say. Anne-Marie talked about Britain going into an existential crisis, which I think is accurate, and Richard talked about the soft power value of a bottle of sherry. Believe me, I could do with more than one bottle of sherry. The thoughts I'm going to share with you today are, however, my sober reflections and not sherry powered thoughts. And I just want to make clear before I start to speak that these are my own thoughts, my own views, and they're not in any sense representative of an institutional view from the CLPR. So it seems to me that trying to understand Brexit through the lens of public diplomacy is a bit like bringing your opera glasses to a dogfight. It allows you to see more blood and dirt, but it's not really much clearer what the attraction is for some people. Initially, I had two main lines of thought about the question for today's symposium. The first was that if the UK was properly attending to its public diplomacy and the importance of soft power, then it would probably never have embarked on Brexit in the first place. Brexit is surely, if anything, a wholesale rejection of the importance of these things in favour of something that feels, at least to a small majority of the public, much more satisfying and authentic. My second line of thinking was that if the UK is going to leave, then the process could have been approached in a way that maximised trust and mutual respect with our European neighbours. There have been moments when the British government has indicated some awareness of this. However, no such approach has been sustainable for the simple reason that the British government is essentially unable to articulate why we're leaving. It is a course of action which a majority of people chose nearly 3 years ago, but there is no majority view as to what we're trying to achieve by doing it. Very few people in government have anything to say about it, except to repeat that they are bound to deliver what was decided in the referendum. Quite literally, we don't know why we're here. We don't understand it ourselves, so we can't articulate it to you or try to build any kind of common understanding about what matters to us. I'm sure Pierluigi will later on explain what I'm wrong about that. There isn't, of course, a single Brexit theory or ideology. Many people who support Brexit simply don't care about public diplomacy or soft power. These things are elite games of no interest to them. Other people who support Brexit are interested in them, but they believe that Britain, unshackled after Brexit, will be a shining beacon of business, trade, and thriving social capital. And Britain, they therefore expect, will have an abundance of soft power. So rather than trying to frame Brexit as a problem in public diplomacy, I'm more interested in thinking about it as a problem of public diplomacy. In other words, instead of trying to use public diplomacy to interrogate Brexit, I'm more interested in using Brexit to interrogate public diplomacy, and in particular, to question the assumption of the preeminent importance of soft power in the modern world. So there are three ideas I would like to expand on today. The first is that Brexit is not unique. There are other and possibly more worrying signs in other countries that signify deep changes in public sentiment, and we should be concerned about all of these and not specifically about Brexit. Secondly, that the supremacy of soft power is a relatively recent phenomenon. So if Brexit is threatening to undermine it, it may be that we are returning to what was the norm in Europe for much of our history. Thirdly, populist politics are indications of deep and troubling tendencies that threaten to damage the very fabric of our civilization. My sense is that we are still only at the early stages of changes that will continue to wrench us further and further away from the founding ideals of post-war institutions such as the EU or indeed the UN. So first of all, why I think Brexit is not unique. Brexit is the latest of what I am going to term rejectionist movements. And I call them rejectionist movements in the context of three paradigms. The first is Machiavelli's famous discussion about whether it's better for a prince to be loved or to be feared. And Machiavelli says it's a very good thing for a prince to be loved, but ultimately it's not safe because love is fickle. So if it comes to a choice between the two, it's better for the prince to be feared. Secondly, Max Weber talked about the prestige of culture and its tension with the prestige of power, which in his day meant something like the tension between Wagner and battleships. And thirdly, the concept from psychology of Selbstbild and Fremdbild, how we see ourselves and how others see us. So I'm going to suppose, for the purposes of my argument, that the European Union is based on the idea of the prince who wants to be loved. So it's based on the idea of consent, consensus, soft power, reason, order, rules. It's not based on force or the threat of force. It's also an institution or a set of institutions based on the prestige of culture. So European states do contend with each other for prestige, but they do it by squabbling over who's going to get, European City of Culture 2020, and not by building armies. Thirdly, I think that as an intended antidote to nationalism, it's very much founded on the idea of Fremdbild, because it constantly asks European peoples and European governments to ask the question, how is this going to look with the neighbours? What are the neighbours going to say? And so, for this reason, I call Brexit a rejectionist movement, because it essentially says we don't care what the neighbours think, we don't care what the neighbours say, we're not interested in European City of Culture, and we quite like more battleships, please. So, in that sense, it can be seen as a movement towards prestige and power, towards Selbstbild, and towards the idea of a prince who chooses to be feared. And if you accept that paradigm, then we can look for other examples where this kind of rejectionist movement has taken place. There are other examples around the world, but I'm going to think specifically about Europe. Looking back, the first example, it seems to me, came in 1994, when Silvio Berlusconi was first elected Prime Minister of Italy. Now, it's perhaps a measure of how far we've travelled in 25 years, that Silvio Berlusconi now seems to be, if not exactly respectable, but kind of part of the furniture. And it's important to remember what a shock it was when he was elected for the first time in 1994. First of all, he used his own television channels to campaign for power. He had a total disregard for propriety, both in his speech and political discourse, and for his constitutional office. He freely and publicly mixed his own personal business interests with state affairs. He was given to grandiloquent and meaningless claims, and he was enormously popular. He was, in my view, the politician who made Trump possible. He first demonstrated that it was possible to simply disregard or have complete contempt for the norms of liberal democracy and to get away with it. And he didn't just get away with it once. In 1994, we thought, well, it's Italy, governments come and go, this is an anomaly, it won't last. But actually, he was elected several times and went on to become the longest serving Italian Prime Minister since the war. And that was the first indication that it was possible for someone to take and hold political power while just deliberately flying in the face of everything that the EU and the kind of post-war order was supposed to be about. A second example was in Austria, when in 1999, the Austrian Freedom Party was elected on a strong anti-immigration policy. That was an even bigger shock to Europe, and at the time, other European governments talked about placing Austria inside a cordon sanitaire. So there were in effect EU sanctions on Austria for a period. Other governments refused to meet the Austrian government. There were no contacts between officials, and Austria was isolated until that government resigned. But of course, the social movement and the Austrian Freedom Party didn't go away. In 2016, we saw the party came within a hair's breadth of winning the presidency. Since then, there are other examples of what we might term Berlusconi-like or Trump-like behaviour, and all of these are based essentially on saying, we want to do what we think is good for us, we don't care what the neighbours think, we're not interested in the conventions and norms of public diplomacy, we're just going to do what we like. So Viktor Orban has already been mentioned, with his steady squeeze on the free press. There's been a long drawn out battle in Poland over the freedom of the judiciary, These things were simply inconceivable 25 years ago, but they've rapidly become the norm. So I think it's important to look at Brexit as one of this class of phenomena and not to treat it, although it has its own specifics, not to treat it as an isolated example. My second point is about soft power and its relatively short life. So if the period of short power is now coming to an end, we should perhaps not be too surprised. Throughout history, there have been many examples of European states placing a strong emphasis on the importance of soft power. And we might think about the Republic of Florence and the formation of the Accademia della Crusca. We might think of the appointment of Galileo as its court mathematician and philosopher. We might equally think of Louis XIV and the investment he made in Europe's first modern orchestra or the cultivation of the sciences. However, for most European states, for most of the time, it was hard military power that counted. The new European order in 1815 at the Congress of Vienna was solidly founded on military power. The King of Prussia became the Watcher on the Rhine, and the Tsar of Russia became the gendarme of Europe. Despite this, Europe was at peace. Although there was civil unrest in some countries, war between states all but disappeared. And this conservative order maintained the balance of power very effectively. Armies were small, and navies after Trafalgar even smaller. This began to change in the 1840s. The railways, the steamship, and the telegraph transformed communication. The reading public became more engaged in the twists and turns of diplomacy. But this communications revolution did not lead to a greater common understanding. On the contrary, it led to increased competition between the powers for status on the basis of respect, which meant a renewed emphasis on military power. For centuries, diplomacy had been the business of rulers, and people were largely indifferent to who ruled them. After the 1840s, European governments could not easily maintain the consent of the governed if they appeared to be weak in dealing with their neighbours. The newspapers in every language frothed and fulminated about alleged slights to French honour, Italian valour, English decency, or Germany's legitimate interests. These sensitivities led to a steady rearming, a great race between Britain and Germany to build battleships, and ultimately to the First World War. During this period, European states were almost entirely unconcerned with earning the goodwill of their neighbours' populations. They were concerned only with earning their respect. Only when the Bolsheviks took power in Russia did any state invest significant effort in building international public support for its positions by funding newspapers and publications overseas, issuing films and newsreels, and managing the foreign press at home very tightly. It was only in the era of the Cold War that the United States really began to compete in the soft power arena. From art galleries to jazz music, Fulbright scholarships, and the celebration of modernism, it struggled against the Commonwealth and its front organisations. The period from 1948 to 1988 saw the deployment of a new combination of hard and soft power on the scale never before attempted. This era lasted until the fall of the Berlin Wall and the famous peace dividend that saw the beginning of a remarkable period in public diplomacy, an era in which soft power reached a higher importance than ever before. For countries other than the United States, hard power declined without causing a loss of international status. In 2008 and the years that followed, public trust in the global financial and intergovernmental institutions collapsed. The World Bank and the IMF managed their way out of the crisis by squeezing ordinary people. We live today in a world in which I doubt whether there is a single global institution that is liked or trusted by the public, whatever their political views. The infrastructure which, since 1945, soft power was generated and transmitted has been critically weakened. Thus, we find ourselves in a world today where, regardless of Brexit, soft power counts for less among the Western democracies. Indeed, the countries most interested in soft power today are Russia and China. For a simple and admittedly crude snapshot of who thinks soft power matters, here are some numbers. The British Council doesn't actually say how many offices it has, but says it is active in more than 100 countries, which I take to be British Council speak for. We have offices in fewer than 100. The Goethe Institute has 159 offices. The Alliance Française has 850. The Confucius Institute had 480 in 2014 and aims to have 1,000 by next year. In the UK, when our government has not been chewing itself to death over Brexit, it has decided, among other things, to renew the supposedly independent nuclear deterrent, to build 2 gigantic aircraft carriers at a cost of $8 billion, and to increase the defence budget in order to also build 4 new dreadnought submarines. Our Defence Secretary, Gavin Williamson, is talking about a network of UK bases around the world. These might be, according to speculation, Brunei, Singapore, or Montserrat. The British Navy has been conducting exercises in the South China Sea alongside the United States. Elsewhere in the world, Japan has abandoned its ridiculous pretense of scientific whaling. The Brazilian Amazon is opening up for business. The Chinese Navy conducts exercises in the Mediterranean, and Iran plans to send ships to the Atlantic. The age of soft power is over, and hard power is on the rise again. So what is driving this? I mentioned earlier that a communications revolution in the 19th century, the railway, the steamship, and the telegraph, was one of the precursors to the hardening of views about political power. There are many who argue that we are experiencing similar effects today as a result of social media. Perhaps we are. But then there were similar arguments, first about radio and then about television. So I think we should not expect Twitter and Facebook to take too much of the blame. How we communicate and what we communicate to each other as individuals and as nations is certainly a matter of tremendous importance. Just as soft power depends on the infrastructure of multinational institutions to flourish, it also depends on a healthy and well-maintained public sphere. Thinkers of all political persuasions have been concerned about the erosion of the public sphere for many decades, certainly long before social media. So the last point I'd like to touch on today is about the erosion of the public sphere and the risks I think this poses to soft power, not only to soft power, but indeed to culture and society more widely. Jürgen Habermas describes the public sphere as something that began in Italy in the 16th century, when men formed drinking clubs to discuss literature. By the 17th century, the clubs had moved on to discussing science. By the 18th century, there were corresponding societies and salons across Europe, many of them now involving women, and most of them discussing politics. And as Habermas describes, this development led to the distinction between what Rousseau describes as homme, the essential man, and what he defined as citoyen, the public person. The homme was about individual appetites, interests, and inclinations. The citoyen, who existed in the public sphere, transcended the merely personal. He sought to improve his knowledge and understanding, to be objective in his judgments, and to seek and to consider the public good. The earliest warnings about the erosion of the public sphere came from the left in the 1940s, from the Frankfurt School, especially Adorno and Horkheimer. They described how mass communication led to mass commercial entertainment, and how this in turn created a world of alienated consumption. As they described it, pleasure replaced discussion, satisfaction replaced inquiry, shopping replaced politics. People behaved less and less as citoyens and became, once again, merely homme. In parallel with this line of thought, writing in the early 90s, Francis Fukuyama considered liberal democracy to represent, in some sense, the end of history. However, he was not optimistic. Human beings will rebel, he said, against the idea of being undifferentiated members of a universal and homogeneous state. They will find the life of rational consumption, in the end, boring. They will want to have ideals by which to live and die. and they will want to risk their lives. This is the contradiction that liberal democracy has not yet solved. Fukuyama was widely derided at the time for his ideas about the end of history, but in fact the intervening years have borne him out, and the Hegelian drive for recognition that he predicted has come about. We should acknowledge here that the erosion of the public sphere and the rebellion against a universal and homogeneous state feels to many people like progress. It has the effect of increasing our authenticity, because it weakens the concepts of the citoyen, selflessness, reason, and objectivity. Instead, we return to something authentic, organic, and whole, the homme with his appetites and interests. In our postmodern culture, politics has no need to appeal to any higher purpose or common good. On the contrary, there are positive advantages for politicians who invite voters to throw off the remaining vestiges of their role as citoyen and at last just be themselves. The results are not always very attractive. So my conclusions, the implications for Britain and the EU. Firstly, I don't think we should be too worried about Brexit. Brexit is the symptom and not the disease. Be worried about the possible end of the age of soft power and the return of gunboat diplomacy. I believe we are living in an age where Selbstbild has started to count for much more than Fremdbild, where rulers judge that in order to be loved by their own people, they would do better to be feared by others. Where public life is increasingly dominated by hommes rather than by citoyens. Where dictatorships need soft power to lull their opponents, and democracies need hard power to maintain their prestige. Secondly, while so much attention is currently focused on Britain, I'm interested in the question of how the EU is going to function in the future. Some Brexiteers are convinced that when we leave, other countries will follow. I find this very hard to believe. But I also find it hard to believe that the EU will be able to just raise anchor and sail on. The issues and the feelings which are powering Brexit are not unique to Britain. They are driving other political forces in other countries right across Europe. If the EU cannot overcome these feelings, it will have to accommodate them. It may therefore perhaps have to become somewhat less of a rule-driven apparatus, less of a closely integrated group of states, and more of a symbolic entity. It may perhaps therefore become, as Voltaire expressed it, neither holy nor Roman nor an empire. It is sometimes argued that the EU has a democratic deficit, and that making its institutions more democratic will make them more popular. In my view, this is wrong. For many in Europe, the issue is not the alleged lack of democracy, it is the erosion of the nation state. Paradoxically, if the EU reverted to the governance mechanisms it used back in the 1950s, I believe its popularity would rise. Back then, it was essentially an intergovernmental institution. Most people have no problem with the idea of negotiations and trade-offs between nation states. But a lot of people do have a problem with an entity, however democratic, which is able to enforce its wishes on nation states. In fact, the calls for ending the democratic deficit in Europe are simply calls for more power to be vested in EU institutions. The view of most British people, and the view of perhaps many others in other member states, is that the task is not to give that transfer of power a more democratic character, but to prevent it. This, I believe, will remain one of the key challenges for the EU with its own publics in the remaining member states. Lastly, as for Britain, there are really only two future possibilities as far as public diplomacy is concerned. The first is that leaving the EU will yield all the benefits that its advocates have claimed: freedom, prosperity, international solidarity, while at the same time delivering greater global standing for Britain and fewer problems. If this is the direction we're heading in, I don't think our public diplomacy will have many problems at all. We will be a happy and prosperous land, and people in other countries will want to be like us. The second is that this future of Britain turns out to be a delusional folly. Having said that Brexit is not unique, I have to acknowledge that if it goes badly, its impact on us will be immeasurably worse than some of the things that I have used as comparisons. If this happens, there will be millions of bitter and angry people who will not, of course, blame themselves for the mess they are in. They will probably not even blame the Conservative Party, which, astonishingly, despite its obvious problems, seems to be doing okay in the polls. Their anger and their resentment will be directed at other targets, and it will not abate. This, I fear, is the future my country will find itself in. And if we do, our soft power will be gone, and our gunboats will not save us from ourselves.
Thank you very much, Alastair. Are there any urgent questions? Yes.
Sorry, thank you for your presentation. Can you just repeat, it's not a real question, it's just for clarification. Can you just please repeat what the solution for the democratic deficit for the European Union you were saying at the end?
Sorry, I have a tendency to speak very fast.
Yeah.
And when I'm standing with the microphone, I'm faster even than normal. So apologies if that was difficult. My point about the democratic deficit was that from the point of view not only of Brexit voters, but of many other voters, many people who support the European Union, is a false question. So the framing of a question in that way is really about by what mechanism can we transfer more powers to the European Union? I know, let's make it democratic. So the point I'm trying to get to is that for many people in Britain, that's the wrong question. So we don't want to transfer more powers and make it democratic. We want to not transfer the powers. So there was a lot of discussion before the referendum about the democratic deficit, and a lot of people said, well, the EU isn't really democratic, but actually that didn't make very much difference. People don't mind whether it's democratic or not democratic. They want it to kind of not be in their face.
Thank you.
Right. Pierluigi.
Yeah. Hello, everyone.
Who will sit?
I will sit only because I represent a country that is leaving the EU, and I don't want to put any further distance between me and my co-panelists. So I knew that Anne-Marie's very kind invitation to be here, which I'm delighted about, would put me in a quite challenging situation. After hearing Nicolas and Alastair, I think I was underrating the level of the challenge. So I will try and do my job properly, aiming to demonstrate that some of what is being said by my predecessors not quite as one can see it. I need to be a positive and an optimistic by contract, so you will forgive me, but I needed to put that in the context of my role here, where I have the great honor and the privilege to represent Her Majesty's government in Italy. So, first and foremost, let me share a couple of thoughts about Brexit in general and what it really means to me. Something that Alastair just said en passant in his final remarks, I think deserves more time for reflection, which is that the temptation by those looking at Brexit, and in particular at the result of the referendum in June 2016, is often to forget the real essence of that, which is that Brexit is first and foremost a very divisive matter, not only between the UK and the EU, or the UK and its neighbors and friends and allies in Europe, but it is indeed very divisive within the UK. Now, A tiny little majority decided in June 2016 that the country should leave the EU, but that left the country split into almost two equal halves. 51.2% voted to leave, 48.2% voted to stay. So the result of that vote is not, I don't think, to be considered the beginning and the end of every evil, but as Alastair said, should be seen as a symptom of something that apparently the majority, even though a little majority of the voters, thought something didn't work as well as they hoped, and therefore decided to vote against the permanence of the UK in the EU. Now, if you see this as a symptom, and I don't want to mention this just en passant, you probably have a different perspective on how you evaluate the whole situation that you're currently in. Rejectionist movements are something that Alastair talked about, and I agree with a lot of what you said, but probably if you take a step back, those rejectionist movements are indeed the symptom of something, of social unrest or unhappiness that lead today people to vote in probably not so surprising ways at referendum. In Italy we had one, but also in political elections too. So, of course, the outcome of the referendum has opened an unprecedented process, which is technically very complex, but super challenging from a political point of view. And this is, as I said, both inside and outside the UK. So if we're focusing here today on the implication of Brexit from a public diplomacy perspective, we should never forget the serious consequences that it brought forward for the UK at home as well. Now, having said that, let me challenge a little bit the assumption that lies behind the subtitle of this talk today, which clearly implies that the UK has been doing nothing or very little from a public diplomacy perspective since the vote at the June 2016 European EU referendum. Well, in this case, the aim of soft power is twofold. On one side, and this is what my colleagues covered already, soft power and public diplomacy need to try and create the condition from a continued positive perception of the UK abroad. And this is, I promise you, rather challenging. It has been rather challenging, and it continues to be rather challenging, in particular for somebody that sits in the press office of an embassy that has its seats in a very pro-European country like Italy. The second aim for public diplomacy is to, in this context, try and create the conditions for a constructive negotiation with Brussels and with other European friends and partners. Indeed, and this is the point I want to stress, the effort that has been put in this critical area by the British government was and continues to be significant. I'd say unprecedented, as well as unprecedented is the situation in which we find ourselves. Certainly, in many countries, these efforts might have been undermined by a narrative, rather critical, negative, that often mainstream media carried out in line and in the interest of an illusion that the tough line against the UK would prevent other countries to follow suit. And this is, I think, an illusion because a punitive approach is not something that necessarily will bring the results that would be hoped for by those who preach that approach. So it's no surprise that the feeling from this end has been like quite an unbalanced warfare, whereas lots of experts, opinion makers, economists were deploying themselves to take any opportunity to show how the vote had meant incredibly serious consequences for the British economy, talking about regrettable consequences of the vote, on the chauvinistic drift of the country. Well, it's not that easy because, as I said, the country is split. So it's difficult to, I would say, carry over the message of a country that has become, from one day, completely different from the country that everybody has known before, inclusive, integrating diversities, and welcoming talent. So after setting this context, let me tell you a little bit about some of what we did in Italy. First of all, Italy and the UK enjoy a historically special relationship that goes back centuries, and from the times of the Roman Empire leads to the current almost 700,000 citizens, Italian citizens, that who have made the UK their home. In history, just think of Shakespeare. Shakespeare located 1/3 of his 37 plays in Italy. Don't forget the Grand Tour. So the picture is one of two countries, the UK and Italy, that certainly have signs and show signs of a close relationship, friendship, and a key partnership across history. So this does indeed provide to us a huge capital from a soft power perspective that we as UK government are determined to preserve and to develop further for the benefit of our bilateral relation with Italy, notwithstanding Brexit. In a post on LinkedIn in July 2016, so just a few weeks after the referendum on Brexit, I used one of the most popular song of an Irish band, not a British band, the U2. You may have heard of them. To say that Italy and the UK would remain friends and special allies and partners with or without EU. Okay? And this was not just an expression of a good intention by a British government representative, but also a message that was drawn from Italian ministers, politicians, businesses, who, despite their disappointment about the outcome of Brexit, which is something that the British government knows very well. We know that many Italians, as well as many people from Belgium, from France, were very disappointed, annoyed, upset about the vote and the uncertainties that it brought forward for many obvious reasons. But the determination is to continue, including by those in those elites. And I'm sorry to say, I don't think that Brexit is an elite game. On the contrary, it's something that is a game that is coming from the grassroots, Alastair. But anyway, so despite the disappointments, the message that we drew from Italian politicians and ministers was that they continued to want the UK to remain a close ally and partner. But this was not just for the warm affection towards the UK. which is probably now the home of many of their nephews or sons and children or friends, but also for more strategic reasons, that they see the benefit of remaining partner of a country that has worked and will continue to work with them to tackle the shared challenges for their and our prosperity and security. So when it comes to tackling climate change, illegal migration, terrorism, using new opportunities to do business between our countries, that is where politicians see the value of maintaining close relationship with the UK. But this, of course, provides a very partial picture of how a country reacts to something like the Brexit vote, and in particular, a very partial picture of how a country sees the UK now. So this is the reason why, for the very first time, we decided a few months ago to run the first ever opinion poll survey in Italy to understand what Italians think and thought about the UK. So public diplomacy is all about understanding the country in which you operate and trying to engage as effectively as possible with that country. So at some point, a few months or almost 2 years after the Brexit vote, we said, hang on a second, all these media are talking about Brexit, about the UK, but here in Italy, nobody ever bothered to ask themselves, what do Italian people really think about the UK and about Brexit? And so we run this survey as British government in Italy. We commissioned a survey to a well-known and respected opinion pollster, SWG. And we run that survey to gather that information that we thought would help us take more informed decisions about how to engage effectively with Italy. And the results we had were so interesting and encouraging that we didn't only use the results for our greater intelligence of Italy, but we called a press conference and shared the results with the Italian media. What did these results say in a nutshell? So our headline was that Brexit doesn't hold Italians back. Why? Because the majority of them want to continue to have a close UK-EU relationship even after Brexit. They said that the Brexit vote in Italy didn't influence or affect the willingness to travel to the UK for tourism, study, or business for 3 Italians out of 4. 3 Italians out of 4 also said that they wished to maintain a close cooperation between the UK and the EU in the fields of security and defense. And the majority welcomed the proposal put by Theresa May. Now we've gone over it, but for the creation of a free trade area between the UK and the EU. So in a nutshell, what we've done, we have benefited from the opinions of the Italians to reinforce our message that the UK and the EU, Italy in first place, should remain close allies even after the UK's exit from the EU. I'll tell you something more that we did, because we thought that in a way, trying to find ways to use the voice of people, of real people, was also possible through different ways. And we, British Embassy in Italy, launched ourselves as the first similar British organization in all the world on a new social media platform, which is called Spreaker. Spreaker is a podcast platform that allows you to record an audio file, an interview, and then to put it on a channel. We have a UK and Italy channel on Spreaker.com, and what we have started to use it for was to give the floor to those Italians who, despite the uncertainties of Brexit since June 2016, were continuing to have great opportunities for their lives and their careers in the UK. So the first interview was with Deborah Bonetti, who is an Italian journalist based in the UK now for 20 years, who few weeks actually before I interviewed her in Venice in January last year, so 12 months ago, she had become the first non-British director of the Foreign Press Association in London. And I said, this is great, this is unprecedented. And this shows how, despite what many in Italy read about the UK having become a country that has lost all its appeal and is deemed to go for international isolation, many people, and many Italians in particular, continue to have great opportunities for their life and are determined to continue to believe and work hard for their future in the UK. So this is something that we did using the podcasts for trying to tell a different story. So the great value of social media here is not only we use this as a new digital experiment or a new experiment in digital diplomacy, but this was instrumental in meeting real people and hearing from them extraordinary stories of success from them, and despite all that was happening in the UK. Now, just to recap, I've talked to you about a particular narrative about how we're trying to make sure that Italy understands that notwithstanding Brexit, the UK wants to continue to remain a close partner and allies to tackle together the challenges that are in common between our two countries. What I'm saying to you about UK and Italy is obviously the same, with some differences, of course, for the UK in other EU countries. Every EU country is enjoying different relationship, a different history that is shared with the UK. Then we use the opinions of the Italians to stress the reciprocity of intentions behind our fruitful relation with Italy that should continue to develop. And then I spoke to you about an innovative and collaborative way to engage with the Italian community in the UK, which, by the way, our opinion poll survey that I mentioned before revealed was Italians in the UK are among the 3 top sources of knowledge and information about the UK for Italians who are in their homeland, so who have remained in Italy. And this is how something was used as a good indication of the opportunity to engage more directly with the Italian communities in the UK. And the podcast was one more probably innovative way amongst many others in which we are continuing to engage with Italians in the media. But we did much more. We worked extensively on all the soft power assets that the UK, I'm afraid, continues to enjoy amongst foreign public. And I'm speaking about very different things like the popularity of British pop music amongst young Italians, or the UK's widely known cultural heritage, from Shakespeare, as I said, to the most vibrant creative industry sector that the UK enjoys, the ease of doing business in the UK, the values of democracy, meritocracy, diversity, and equal opportunities that continue to underpin society, and freedom of press. Nicola, I understand where you were coming from when speaking about media coverage in British tabloid, but portraying the UK as the country with the least trustworthy press is a little bit unfair because of it being the homeland of the BBC, and of many well-respected media outlets. Of course, tabloids is part of the picture. But when I jumped on my chair, probably you didn't see when you described the UK media as a whole, actually the UK is knowledge and respected for freedom of press and freedom of speech. And so the BBC itself is a great soft power asset alongside the British Council. I haven't got, Alastair, the latest figures on the number of offices. What I know is that the British Council is a key partner of the British Embassy in Italy, of the Foreign Office in Italy, and we are delivering this year a cycle of events on bridging the gaps. Because the symptom I've mentioned before, and seeing Brexit as a symptom of something, is also talking about a country and an issue that is not only affecting the UK, but all our societies, I think, and I speak as an Italian. So there are huge gaps in our societies, in our countries, the way in which people live, think and vote in big capital cities is very different from the way in which people do similar things in small villages in the countryside. The way in which old people think and vote is very different from the way in which young people think and vote. So we have focused on the way in which we can bridge the gaps in our societies in a cycle of events between Italy and the UK, alongside our colleagues and friends of the British Council. So where all this lead us? So it's very difficult for a professional that works in public diplomacy or in communications to understand how to evaluate the impact of what you do. This is what I call the typical frustration of communications officers around the world. Because when it comes to understanding how or whether or not your activities has influenced the way in which people think or behave, it is very hard indeed. It's something that academics, think tanks, probably devote a lot of thinking and of resources into. But it's not an easy task, because we're not talking about rocket science. We are talking about people's behaviors, people's thoughts. So it's very difficult. With this caveat, I have to say that probably the results of our second survey, following the first opinion poll survey about how the Italians see the UK providing us as a good baseline, will probably provide some sort of indication of whether or not the way in which people now think about the UK has shifted from the way in which they saw the UK only a few months ago. But let's see, I will keep you updated about the results as they come in later this year. But probably let me offer one example, which is a qualitative evaluation, not a quantitative evaluation, of the kind of headlines that we saw in the Italian press following some of what I have told you we've been doing since June or July 2016. This headline was featured in the most popular and widely read news website in Italy, Repubblica.it. Repubblica is the second or the first, depending on the period, most widely read daily newspaper in Italy. And the headline was, at some point, the love story between the Italians and the UK continues, notwithstanding Brexit. And this is exactly what we wanted to show. So it's a little example. I am open to answer your questions. In my speech, I just wanted to share that there is still a government in a country that is in a very historical period. There is history that is alive and kicking and wants to make the most of soft power. Because, Nicola, one more thing I was doubtful about is when you made a comparison or the contrast between crisis manager and public diplomats. I think that when push comes to shove, or there are other expressions in English which are less polite, when things become very difficult, when you're in crisis, this is where a government must invest more in soft power and not less, because that is what could eventually make the difference. I'm not sure whether what we've been doing in Italy as UK government will make the difference. As I said, I have to be positive by contract, so we'll remain that. But certainly it's being our constant concern to try and push all the positive messages across about the way in which, despite all what we know Brexit is about in country, there is a government that is willing to continue to work with its historical European partners. Because at the end of the day, as Theresa May used to say, and you will know this refrain very well, the UK is leaving the EU but not turning its back to Europe. Thank you very much.
So the floor is now open to questions, but would you like to stand up and stretch a bit before we stand up in place before we go on with the questions? No? Very well. I know Anne-Marie has some questions which have been lodged before. Do you want to start with those, Anne-Marie? Oh, you go.
Yes, I have one with a question from Roger Ace. So, governments are still at the center of public diplomacy, but there is increasing support for the convention that non-state actors, including international corporations, NGOs, and special interest groups, not to mention citizens themselves, can play a role in public diplomacy outcomes. To what extent has this been the case with Brexit? With interest groups on both sides and corporations, financial institutions mainly wanting to matter to be settled due to uncertainty and by all means avoid no-deal Brexit.
Sounds like a statement, really.
Yes, that is more of a statement, yes.
Sorry, while you think of an answer, can I make an answer?
So basically, can other actors play a role on the Brexit story, on public diplomacy, besides, of course, the government?
In answer to him, I've undertaken in my career a lot of public diplomacy activities, Hong Kong being one, the EU embassy in Vietnam being another. And key to that has been the creation of networks. So the short answer to Roger is yes, networks by definition involve people beyond the government is the driver, perhaps.
Yeah, the next question is really...
Can I just chip in on this first question? So I agree entirely. I've mentioned the British Council, the BBC, playing a key role in spreading British culture through the teaching of English language, in the case of British Council, in spreading quality information in case of the BBC. But when it comes to not public diplomacy, but national branding, in that, and we covered that already, the way in which people perceive a country. What is the first mental association that they have when they think of the UK? Everything and anything play into that, because the opportunities of traveling to the UK or to any country provide each individual with an opportunity to create a different idea of the country that they visit. Or if you go to a music concert of a British artist, or if you see an art exhibition, or if you go to the cinema and see a British movie, everything can help to shape up an image of a country. This is true for the UK, as well as is for Belgium, for France, for any country of those that you come from. The difference is in government-driven activities or non-government-driven activities. I see both as instrumental in shaping an image that people, foreign audiences, have or develop of your country. Sometimes it can be positive, sometimes it is less so, but anything can play into this, I think.
Alastair wants to comment on the same question.
I think it's a very interesting question. It's interesting how ineffective those voices have been in Britain, both before the referendum and since. So there was a very strong feeling on the part of business, certainly, that they should remain neutral in the period before the referendum and absolutely avoid taking any position. It was, an open secret, really, that in general terms, business was opposed to Brexit. There were some notable exceptions, but there was no business campaign against Brexit. People thought that would jeopardize public trust in businesses, so they kept quiet. After the referendum, there was a tendency to believe either that it wouldn't happen, or that if it did happen, the government would be able to come up with some deal which would be favourable to business, and a lot of talk was around that. The Confederation of British Industry is not a lightweight player in terms of lobbying in Britain. It has pretty much unparalleled access to ministers. So the head of the CBI meets the Chancellor of the Exchequer every Wednesday morning for what's called a fireside chat. In other words, there's no agenda, no papers. The CBI goes every single week to the highest level of government and talks about what's on their mind and what matters to them. It really hasn't had very much impact at all. There are some people who say, well, government is in the pockets of corporate lobbyists. Well, absolutely not, on the basis of the last 2 years' experience. There are different groups, different civic society groups campaigning for one thing or another, but it's been really remarkable how little people's views have shifted. So there was an explanation 2.5 years ago that said that, well, this is an emotional spasm, and on sober reflection, people will change their minds. There are some small indications that's happening a bit now, but not generally. So people, having taken their position, really have stuck to it. And I think there's an interesting thing in the psychology of fraud, and it's called escalation of commitment. And you read these stories, and you think, you read the story about somebody who was found, in Lagos airport, waiting for their friends to turn up to give them $100 million from the late minister's estate, having, over the course of 2 years, emptied their own bank account on facilitation fees. And you just think, how on earth would anyone persuade themselves that this was a sense of, how did you get so far down the line? Was there no point at which you thought, actually, maybe I've made a serious mistake here? But it's a psychological thing. Once people have taken their position, they dig in harder and harder and become more and more resistant to counter arguments. So there's been a huge amount of talk and shouting about Brexit from just about every angle, it hasn't really made a great deal of difference. And I think one way of looking at Brexit is to say that it represents, in some sense, a failure of corporate diplomacy, because business really hasn't been effective in getting its points across.
Next question.
Yeah. In our multi-directional and networked world with omnipresent social media, to what extent have non-governmental stakeholders been influential in the debate on the UK government and UA government? So what's the role of social media on these matters?
I can only well, take the example of, well, in this case, the question is focusing on non-governmental actors. So I think this goes back to what just has been said, but maybe I could add the role of governmental actors. And if you look at the soft power or the efforts of intergovernmental or international organization, and if you look at the EU, well, they were low-key. I mean, the efforts were low-key for exactly the same reason than businesses, because they did not want to interfere, because they were afraid that this would actually even increase the arguments of the Leave side. It's a very tricky question, and we know that the social media campaigns of the European institutions are not that effective, and this is an understatement. Because you know, what's your target? Who's the target? If you're targeting stakeholders, very well, why not? But the stakeholders, they remain silent because they don't want to interfere. If you target civil society, but you know, often in the European jargon, you know, all these actions are taking civil society, organized civil society. Well, you have trade unions, you have employees, employers organization. Very well, consumer organization, well, same problem, they are divided because you have citizens there that don't agree on, for instance, on Brexit. So it's very difficult to target them and to involve them. You can try at least to perhaps to connect or to interconnect national initiatives and try perhaps to give them a bigger, you know, visibility. That's something that has been done at the EU level. But other than that, you know, who is speaking in the name of this international organization? Think about the European Commission. Are there any commissioners that wanted to interfere? No, of course not, because of course they are also respecting their own sense of diplomacy, of organizational diplomacy. So it's a very difficult thing actually to envisage that, you know, an international organization or any other type of international body would actually take a side in that debate.
Yes, one last one.
So if I can add something, I think in the context of the debate in the United Kingdom, and you spoke earlier, I think, of framing the debate, the Brexiteers were very good at putting out fake news which framed the debate in a way that it was that the Remainers were almost always forced into a position of answering those false claims. You know, we've got the NHS one, we've got various other ones. So you also had the leadership there. For example, you take Boris, who knowingly was after the headline rather than after the fact. And that framed the debate again. And so all the time you were having the social media, and to an extent the media, were actually reinforcing those prejudices rather than like exposing them or answering them. And it goes back a long way. You listed those fake claims that have gone down over the years and not been aggressively corrected by the European Union. And those have fed into a climate in the United Kingdom of being anti-Europe anyway, before the Brexit started, Brexit debate started.
And just if I might add something about just to answer also as Pierluigi was saying earlier. Now about the British media in general. Of course, BBC is undisputedly the one very important and very respected media. But the studies I was mentioning are focusing on the way British citizens are looking at their own press. And according to these studies, the British press is one of the least trustworthy press in Europe. And of course, not all of them are spreading fake news, not all of them are misleading, but it does create an atmosphere, it does create a climate, a 20-year long, it's actually a form of soft power that they were actually putting in place. So it was paving the way for later the UKIP campaigns and other political communication initiatives that were just tapping into these existing stories and existing narratives.
So the last question from Roger is, research in the UK shows that Remain argue for the head, rationality, and leave from the heart, emotion. What does this tell us about civic diplomacy, given that elites and experts tend to use more rational arguments?
That's right. It was, sorry, we're all communicators in a way in this group, and I think we all value perception. And that's it. I think what we're talking about is perception. And perception is reality for most people. And it's very hard to argue the contrary. My perception is this, then I look, and social media tends to reinforce that. I look for things which feed into my perception. I don't go outside of that. And social media, I think, is feeding that. And just one more point about the British media. Historically, the media have, well, they began actually as organs of political parties in many cases. But recently, what you have found with the media, and I think it's pretty much worldwide, instead of having an argument, if you like, of a political position within one media, which is consistent, in order to compete for readership, what the media has had to do is to widen its appeal. And within one newspaper, for example, you will find often an argument on this side and a contrary argument on that side. And that, I think, it has weakened the power and reduced the trust, if you like, in the media, which was a reinforcing tool in the past. But now it tends to question your perceptions by providing contrary views.
I just wanted to say that question recapitulates the point I was trying to make far too rapidly about the distinction between homme and citoyen. So we're moving into a political culture in which, it's great to say let's all be ourselves, but it's hard to both be yourself and have good relationships with your neighbours, and we haven't quite figured out how to do those things yet.
Sorry, you had a question?
Yeah, in fact, I have two questions. Thank you for all your words and thoughts. And listen, the study that you did in Italy, my question is, are the bilateral relation, so between the states, still stronger than the relation between you and the state members. So what I feel was, are we in fact too far away of a EU identity shared and felt by the European citizens? The public diplomacy from each country remains, thank you, remains stronger than the public diplomacy of EU. This is a question. Then another one. It's so you said the times of soft power are gone, and we are living again times of hard power. And my question is, what can be the role of you in these new times of hard power, as you don't have hard power to play? Thank you.
I'm not sure I understood the question, so I will try to say something. If that doesn't answer the question, just straight away. So, in terms of bilateral relations between Italy and the UK, I said that since the very early stages of after the Brexit vote, engaging with Italian politicians, decision makers, the business community, they all showed a clear line which was shared between them, which was, in the first place, really sad that the UK decided to leave. It will be difficult. Some used to say, I'm really concerned about my children, my son studying there. Will he or she be able to remain? So a lot of, disappointment for what was a decision that probably they didn't agree with, of course. On the other end, Italians showed quite a surprising pragmatic approach. The British are known for being very pragmatic. The Italians are not, but still, well, you can argue against. You are Brits, so you are entitled to do that. But anyway, so the pragmatism was in that, okay, whatever happens, we really want to remain close allies because it's in our interest too. And this is something that we have seen all along the at least couple of consecutive governments and cabinet ministers since 2016. Where does this leave us? I don't know. I think that it is reassuring in a way that important partners like Italy continue to believe that there is a possible future after Brexit. Because at the end of the day, what has happened since the vote in which David Cameron promised a referendum on the membership of the EU, was that the British government has consistently tried to play in two different fields. One is domestic, with the serious challenges posed by the gaps and the differences in the British society, in the British politics, including different views in the British party that is in government now. So, and at the same time playing with dealing with European partners and Brussels in first place. This is an incredibly complex dynamic, because nowadays you cannot make a difference between one occasion when you address your local audiences, your domestic audiences, and another where your message is only relied to foreign audiences. we know that whatever happens has resonance in a global sort of on a global stage. So this has been unprecedentedly difficult to handle. Theresa May, who became the Prime Minister soon after the resignation, David Cameron stepping down, said that it's my duty to respect the vote of the British population. And this is what she's tried to do ever since. Her plan was rejected. She asked for a vote of confidence. She got a majority of 20 MPs voting her confidence. And so she's now coming to Brussels tomorrow. So it's a very timely conference. This one, a few kilometers away from Brussels. And she will have to put a second time a vote to Westminster next week, between either 13th or the 14th of February, and we shall see what we come up with. But it's clearly her intention to try and deliver on the British electorate votes, even though we know this is very divisive. So I'm not sure whether I'll answer your questions, but that allowed me to say a few other things that I did.
I think your second question is really to Alastair.
Yeah. On the first question, first of all, about the relative importance of bilateral links between member states. I think it's noteworthy that the British government has put quite a lot of effort into those bilateral things, to the annoyance, actually, of many of those people, because it's really trying to go around the official negotiating structures of the 27 other states. I'm enormously reassured to hear that there is a stock of goodwill in Italy and I presume other member states. That's good. I'm glad that there is a willingness to continue dealing with us about security or other issues in the future. It's noteworthy that some of the leading Brexit ministers didn't seem to quite understand bluntly what the EU is about. So the talk before the referendum was, we'll just fly, it'll be the easiest negotiation ever. We'll just fly to Berlin, sort it out with Merkel, and she'll tell everyone else what to do. I mean, it's just an extraordinarily crude model of what's actually going on here. And I think it is a source of genuine amazement in Britain, given that we found it difficult to maintain the same line consistently for 2 days. It is a source of absolute amazement that 27 other states have adopted a line and held to it through 2 years. And that's just something that Britain wasn't expecting to happen. They were expecting to pick off Slovenia on this point and pick off Portugal on that point and somehow arrange a deal. And that just hasn't happened. On the second question about if the EU is based on soft power, and I'm arguing somewhat simplistically that soft power is over, I don't think it's completely over, but I think it's very severely diminished. What does the future hold for the EU? I think that's a very difficult question, and that's one of the things that I would be concerned about if I was an EU official. So there seem to me to be two possibilities, one of which I will call the exoskeleton model, and one I will call the endoskeleton model. The exoskeleton model is that the EU actually decides to go down the path of developing some hard power of its own. And that might be in the form of a united or more united military force. There have been calls for a much more coordinated presence in the Mediterranean to deal with the refugee crisis. I don't know what appetite there is for that. It may not work, but that must be one line of possibility. The other line of possibility is the kind of endoskeleton model, where actually the EU kind of retreats in and sits. It doesn't really have a hard external structure, in which case it would be relying on the hard external structures of its member states, so the armed forces of Germany, Spain, Italy, whoever. The danger of that is if it's trying to function in a world where hard power is becoming more dominant, it's difficult to see what that might represent. And that's why I alluded to the idea of the Holy Roman Empire as being a political structure that continued to exist long after it had really served any kind of obvious purpose. It had a symbolic presence, it had a meaning, and people fought over who was going to be emperor. Enormous sums of money were exchanged, battles were fought, but it was hard to discern exactly what this was about. So, but I think that's a very important question for Europe. What is it going to do if it's having to operate in a world in which soft power matters less?
Nicolas, did you want to add?
I totally agree, actually, and there was a very interesting book by one of my colleagues from University UNB, which was about the future of Europe, of the EU, and he had, well, there were two different storylines, and he was comparing the situation that we are in right now. I'm not talking about Brexit, but about the EU, to the late years of the Roman Republic. And one scenario, one was about basically a major split, and he was comparing that to what happened to Greece under the Roman rule. Lots of little tiny cities that were loosely tied together, share a common culture, of course, and history for sure, but eventually without any impact on the global stage, well, at least on the antique stage. And the other future was that we compared with is that of the empire, the Roman Empire, which was a little bit, looks a little bit like what you were just saying about the Holy Roman Empire. Well, the idea to have a strong central and symbolic power, though, with a very decentralized approach, and perhaps also more adapted to the post-liberal times in which we are now. So maybe also tapping into symbolism, which the EU never does. So maybe into feelings, emotions, and trying to interlink national prides and values. So it's very interesting to see that all these different scenarios actually coexist right now, and I don't think that the EU knows in what direction the EU is actually going, and there were 5 different scenarios that were actually developed by the European Commission back in 2017. So doing less with more, doing more with less, and you probably have seen this or read this. But what I don't understand from the Remain perspective, I know that now we are all a bit pessimistic here, but why the narrative wasn't changed since 2016? Because like Alastair said, patriotism is very fashionable these days. It is questionable, but it is, and nationalism is very fashionable. But by 2050, Britain would have had the largest population in Europe, if you look at demographics right now. And according to pre-Brexit economic trends, which could have been restored, it will also have the largest economy. Not if Scotland leaves and whatever. But in Europe, this means that the UK would have had a very strategic role and would be the largest player in the system. And this has, as you know, huge advantages in the European Parliament, for instance. And if you look at what happens in Italy, if you look at what happens in Poland, in Hungary, countries that all have voted for parties that have challenged the current commission-driven Europe and are calling for a return of the Europe of the nations. Well, this is actually tapping into what Brexit was actually, the Leave camp was defending. So, I mean, right now Europe is changing a little bit its direction, and this would have been a perfect moment or a momentum to grasp for the UK actually to try to shape that European future. So it's not a narrative about the economy or anything, but about really reshaping the destiny of Europe. But I don't understand why that narrative hasn't been changed.
Can I say something? Because this is something which is very important, but highlights the gaps or the difference between a very reasonable approach to how international affairs could work or might have worked in terms of benefiting the UK further, and what real people think. So the situation since the financial crisis in 2008 meant that the economy in UK was able to recover more quickly, and therefore became a pole of attraction for many European, often young people, starting to see the UK as an opportunity to find a job or to specialize and kickstart their career. This is very true for the Italian population. As I've mentioned before, we as Italians have a community of 700,000 Italians there. But many other countries were countries of origin of intra-EU migration, which meant that the number of EU residents in the UK in 2008 was 1.5 million. In 2016, when the referendum took place, there were 3.5 million EU residents. And when it comes to the way in which real ordinary people go about their lives and start to realize the challenges for their families to find the same opportunities that other people coming from other countries now enjoy, they don't really care about the UK's international standing. They do care about finding a place in a school for their children, or having opportunities that are now, this is very much something that we were discussing before, something that not only the UK has experienced, is the UK has probably experienced the greatest phenomenon in terms of intra-EU migration flows, which has led many people, although that little majority of the electorate, to vote for Brexit to stop free movement of people. So there are always two very different levels to look at a country. One is government policies, the interest of a country's macroeconomics, and something very different is the daily life of people that probably do not care too much about 1 point of the GDP going up or down. So you always need to put that into that perspective, and how probably politics should respect a probably tough reality that has led to traditional parties being smashed at the latest national elections, and I'm speaking about Italy in particular now.
Any more questions?
Thank you. All right, so my question is, how do you think the EU will or should handle a new exit?
A new
exit, whatever that may be. I hope it will not be a raw exit, because my government is periodically building that talking point. But the thing is that my impression is that the EU treated Brexit like, I know, I'll use a popular culture reference, like Star Trek. The Star Trek team treated new civilizations. They didn't engage. They didn't interfere. and that is how you treat, I don't know, maybe a population you didn't meet, but it's not how you treat someone that you work with for a lot of years, so a partner. So do you think that the EU learned something from this? How do you think they will handle or they should handle the new exit?
Just one, maybe. Just very quickly. I like the metaphor Alastair was making earlier about being, well, using Machiavelli, being loved or being feared. And right now, the way actually the press especially is portraying the negotiation is almost a divorce. And right now, it's basically the betrayed husband or wife that is being extremely cold to the one that left the house. And perhaps one of the strategy in terms of public diplomacy is actually to make this exit actually really tough, really hard, and without a lot of feelings, and without taking really care of public opinion in the nation state. But to answer your question, I think that a lot of countries are actually playing with the idea. There are a lot of Romexit, Frexit, or IHECS that are on the table, or at least that are being discussed, or under the table, yes. So this is creating a form of jurisprudence, and at some point, if we'll see what happens after next month, but this is sort of paving the way of it's showing what is actually possible and how hard it can actually be and become for a member state. And thinking about the UK, which is a very strong nation state, think how it would be for maybe a less strong. I didn't want to mention Romania, but maybe a member state that has some economical issues. So I think it shows a lot. It gives a lot of indications and of elements of form to other current member states of the European Union.
Yeah, just to pick up on the tough line approach, which I'm not sure is still so trendy, not even in the EU, because people may have realized that if you make people like a country feel to be punished for the free expression of a majority of the electorate, might trigger exactly the opposite reaction in those countries who already suffer from a kind of a light affection for the EU. So,
sorry, I'll remind you of a little bit of history. That is that other countries have had exit polls before, and what happened there was they had to poll again. And in this case, it seems to be that the lesson is in out.
I had some thoughts. The first is that if we assume that Theresa May is able to get some kind of deal through Parliament in the next few weeks, which seems increasingly likely to me, we will then have a withdrawal agreement. The withdrawal agreement will then lead to a further at least 2 years of discussions about, because all we've discussed so far is the terms of withdrawal. We haven't even started yet on the question of what the future relationship will be. So believe me, this is going to be utterly, utterly exhausting. I don't believe anybody will want to go through this ever again on either side. What lessons the EU takes from that, I'm not sure. What I suspect will happen is this, that they will deal with it by having a flurry of accessions. So Bosnia-Herzegovina and Serbia are kind of, and Montenegro are kind of waiting to come in. So I think it'll be a useful demonstration of inclusiveness and kind of 2 fingers up to London to say, well, you may want to leave, but we've got these people here who want to join. I think if we leave, it is quite likely that within the next few years there will be an independent Scotland, and an independent Scotland will want to join. So I think the EU will have no trouble filling headlines with lists of people who want to join the club. But that won't deal with the underlying problems that we've talked about. Those will still be there, and they'll still be getting worse. So I suppose my fear is that the EU could spend its time on, I hesitate to say this, audience, but PR exercises about how well everything's going, when the underlying rot in our societies is still there. And what I would be most particularly afraid of is a substantial body of opinion in Germany turning against the EU. So there are all the social problems that we've touched on are particularly noticeable in the former East Germany. There's a very substantial body of people there who probably don't feel that warmly towards the EU. I think there is the basis of a strong anti-EU movement in Germany, and if that reaches the kind of level of political maturity that we've seen in some other countries, the EU is in for a really difficult time.
Any more questions? In that case, I would I'd just like to remind you of something that George Bernard Shaw said. George Bernard Shaw said roughly this, I'll paraphrase: if you want to tell people the truth, make them laugh. And I was hoping to be able to show you something that soft power that New Zealand has done recently, and I would recommend you have a look at it. Put New Zealand back on the map, because as a country, they found that maps of the world were not showing New Zealand at all. And so they've had the campaign to put New Zealand back on the map. And where have they all gone? Anyway, I began by saying as moderator that my intention was light touch. And I don't know if any of you were keeping track of our speakers, but each one of them stuck within a minute or two to the 25 minutes. And I think that, in my experience, that's an extraordinary achievement. So congratulations on that.